Should we pass the...
We are. Yeah, okay. So my name's Saab. I'm the BPS CEO.
Nicola Gale, BPS President.
Amanda Clinton, American Psychological Association.
Okay, Telmo Batista, FPA President.
Tēnā koutou, I'm Quentin Abraham, President of the New Zealand Psychological Society.
Francisco Rodrigues, President of the Portuguese Psychologists Association.
Lynn Littlefield, the Executive Director of the Australian Psychological Society.
Marko Vrtovec, the President of Slovenian Psychologists Association.
Anna Leibina, Russian Psychological Society.
Neringa Grigutytė, President of Lithuanian Psychological Association.
Sébastien Simonet from the Swiss Federation of Psychologists.
Yeah, Conny Antoni, President of the German Psychological Society.
Koen Ringoot, Vice President of the Belgian Federation of Psychologists.
Hi, I'm Pam Moras. I'm President-elect of the International Union of Psychological Science.
Great, thank you very much. Right, I'm going to hand over to Nicola, who's going to give a little bit of a history to how we established this roundtable and some questions that we've got laid out for you.
Yes, when we thought we were going to have so many of our international guests at this conference, we thought it would be a great idea to build on the great success of APA, the APA convention last year, where Amanda Clinton, sitting to my right, organised a very similar roundtable. That, I think, was very successful because lots of countries were there. We talked about the general challenges to psychology, what we're facing, how we're dealing with those challenges, the successes also in our societies in terms of how we're contributing, and some of our plans going forward. So what I thought would be a great idea for our conference is to take that to the next level and to think about some of the themes that we're talking about over the last couple of days and also to tomorrow. So thinking about, what is psychology contributing in terms of leadership, development, community and society, and also open science. So to think about that for each of our psychological associations and our countries. What are the needs and challenges? What are we facing? What are perhaps some of the threats to the way we do things and to our countries in those areas? And then trying to make it a bit more specific. Are there particular areas that we can turn into action plans where we can actually do specific things to collaborate together in those areas? So hopefully everybody's got the questions in front of them. And what we'd like to do is just really have an open debate about that. We are having our work captured in two ways. It's being recorded orally up there, but just behind us there we have Becky. Do you want to say hello, Becky? Becky is an artist. She's our artist in residence for today, and she is capturing in pictures all of the European and international work that we're doing today. So afterwards, do go and see Becky and see what she's made of our discussions, and we will be circulating that not only widely to the membership and on our websites, but obviously giving you that to use in your home countries with your societies too. So that's it by way of introduction. So I'll hand back to Saab, who will be chairing our discussion.
So, who wants to go first? It might be easier to start with the challenges, actually. I think that's quite often the case. We're all facing challenges, regulatory, political, economic, financial. And it'll just be interesting to hear how different societies from around the world are addressing those.
Yeah, I'd like to pick perhaps one aspect we talked about yesterday quite a lot, about open science and about the Open Science Network, and we were very lucky to have such competent persons here in the audience. And I think in Germany, psychology really is pushing this topic forward because our Science Foundation, they brought up the topic I think 2 years ago, and I think we were the first ones really to respond to it, to specify the more general criteria in Germany. And it's still quite a hard discussion because you really see the age gap in the position. So somehow, the younger researchers really pushing for it, and the older reviewers, I must say, they are a bit hesitant, sometimes out of good reasons, because ethical questions, data protection aspects, they are quite complicated when you get into biological or genetic data. But still, it's a topic. And what is also perhaps interesting, because I would like to introduce it here, we have a quite new mission for a quite old institution in Germany that's located in Trier. It's called the Leibniz Institute for Psychology, and they had just got evaluated and have now the mission to really push forward open science, and they really are a support not only for German researchers, but I think all over Europe, as they really support the whole process of doing research, from starting looking for articles. There they have a long tradition for more than 20 years, but also offering pre-registration, offering support for online studies, for example, and having a data repository, which is not quite as flexible as the OSN network, but rather intense, so to say, to have a standardized basis so that you can easily update and do meta-analysis data, so that you really build on what we're all talking about, replicable and reliable and valid results, because you're always feeding into the metadata databases. And they're also open for open access journals. They already have 4, and they already have funds for 20. So that's really a perspective to have a European based and compliant to our standards, so to say, institution. And I think that's a great chance for psychology, and we would like to push forward in this field, and would be happy, of course, if you also are interested and we could collaborate. And I think that's fortunately a service we could really have a European network building on it.
Tēnā koutou te kāhui o te ropu matai hinga o Piritini. And tēnā koe ki te rangatira kia koe Nicola Gale. Just to pick up on open science, I was thinking about this before I came. And in New Zealand, following sort of European, Australian examples, very keen on open access, Marsden grant funders require people to submit their data 12 months afterwards, pending ethical consent. So in a sort of European tradition, open access, very much valued, really want to move to it. Waikato University from 2014 has had that kind of way of making sure all its data, all its publications are available. Just to offer an alternative view, or a slightly different view, is within Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā, so the English European tradition of the settlers, Te Ao Māori, the first people of the land. The first people of the land would say, we are kaitiaki of knowledge. So we don't just kind of give that away freely. We would like to check out whether you are worthy and you're going to hold that knowledge, or actually misuse it, misrepresent it. Do you know our language? Do you know our concepts? Do you know our ideas? So the marrying of those ideas have been some amazing developments in New Zealand, and I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about that, whether it's around restorative justice, our early years curriculum, so some fantastic things, but there are risks of misappropriating that sort of cultural content. Who gets control of it? What kind of cultural checks or balances are there to make sure that we are doing the right thing with that information, not building our own careers on the back of others?
We have quite a number of challenges in Russia, but I would like to emphasize one in particular which bothers me for quite a while. Well, we have two groups of psychologists in Russia. One, the practitioners, the scientists who follow the main trends around the world, whose practices are really credible, who provide quality service, supervised practice, evidence-based, whatever, you name it. And we have huge amount of people which our society tries to reach out, but we don't know how to do that successfully. So for those tremendous amount of people whose practice is of doubtful quality, like there are a number of, let's say, lawyers who decided to become psychotherapists, and so after 2 years course, they call themselves psychotherapists and they deliver service. And of course, if we are talking about legislations, rules, laws, they are in huge resistance. And basically, we do not have that, psychology and psychotherapy terms defined and placed in laws. And, well, we are struggling in that. And we are hoping, well, I think I addressed question number 3 already. So we are hoping to get more support from our more advanced society colleagues on how we can reach out to those, or at least how can we educate the general public so that they would understand that basically they are receiving doubtful quality service and they can get better service for a similar price. So, thank you.
I'm Marko from Slovenia, and we have just the same issue that you have in Russia. Namely, we are also facing with an increasing number of so-called psychologists or wannabe psychologists, or even psychotherapists. And the only solution that we think it will work is to introduce some sort of licensing. So that's where our efforts go this moment. I mean, the main goal is, of course, to protect the user, since people are not so well informed about what is the right quality of the service they are supposed to get or they should ask for. So yeah, there's a lot of these self-taught or semi-educated experts offering their services. So that's really a big issue, and yeah, we're also hoping that colleagues with much longer tradition in terms of liberalized market will help us with advice.
The Australian Psychological Society was lucky enough to advocate to get universal government-funded services for all Australians. So psychology services are accessible to everyone. Now, that's been absolutely fantastic and the demand's been enormous, but our challenges are the unintended consequences. So the unintended consequences are that we have other professions trying to get into this initiative, and they are lesser trained than psychologists and therefore a cheaper workforce. And the government is quite interested in having cheaper workforces. So therefore we're under competition and considerable threat from these people. And what that makes us look at is our length of training, which in Australia is a minimum of 6 years, which is international, but 8 years for specialties like clinical psych. And these other workforces are much shorter pathways. And also our training is like a bottleneck. We start off with thousands of undergraduates and it tailors in to the very few that can do the specialties. So really one big challenge is to totally review, in my view, our education and training models and how we actually, hold our ground in this new climate, this new environment.
Okay, maybe starting precisely with with this thing about what our national health system provides or not. It is supposed to provide to everyone too. Well, it's theoretically a guarantee, but in practical terms, that does not happen because of scarcity of means. So there are no psychologists in the number that could deliver what the demands of the population is in concrete terms. So that is one of the threats. Simultaneously, we have a lot of institutions training possible future psychologists, and training them with an emphasis on areas in fields of practice where it is going to be very difficult to have a work. And that's another issue related to this that we have to face. There's a continuous interest and in the population about what we do, what we deliver in very different areas, in health, in education, in justice, in organizations, and in very specific areas too, in environment, in several community services. So it's a very big opportunity, but the money that is being put it on public services or in private services, in the organizations, in companies, to do this with psychologists, it's far away from this demand from people. So it's like something nearby the dilemma about attitude and behavior, really. So it's not happening what it's supposed to with this awareness. And we have been working from the beginning of our organization. It's 10 years, just 10 years, in this awareness. So we have a lot of campaigns about what psychologists do, a lot of campaigns in several areas, public campaigns in the media, trying psychologists, maybe the ambassadors of these campaigns too, and so having exponential results of these campaigns. We have tried to work in the openness. I'm inventing this. The openness of science. Well, in literacy, for the population in psychological terms, in health psychology or in other areas. But the goal is for sure to put psychology as a science very near the people, all people, and in areas that it could make the difference for a lot of people. Even areas that are not traditionally areas where we are working a lot. An example, we are now going to sign this month an agreement with the national supervision system, financial system, to make some inputs to financially literacy programs to schools, to put on these literacy programs the way we think, we make decisions, the kind of errors of effects that affects our decisions in our lives and in decisions in financials in the financial life too, so that we can prevent in the future, like consumers, grown-up consumers, problems that maybe systemic problems to all of us. So that's something that we can do as psychologists, that is contributing for community, and that tries simultaneously to open a new space to psychologists to work to, and more influence in society simultaneously.
Hi. First of all, thank you for letting me join you all at this table. I sit up here and want to pinch myself. That's really amazing to work with such insightful, globally minded, brilliant colleagues. So, but I'm going to pinch Telmo instead. Just kidding. Yeah. Anyway. I just think I'm listening to what everyone's saying, and I'm thinking these are challenges in terms of practice. We face a lot of scope of practice issues in the United States. What do we do with similar professions who want to work as if they were psychologists? Education and training is critical. How do we increase mobility and manage quality, policy and access to policymakers, particularly in the context of so much anger and lack of respect for science in the United States currently is something we're working very hard on. And in addition, research, even just maintaining funding levels for the kind of research we do and supporting science through our National Institutes of Health and National Science Foundation. But so we have very similar regulatory practice training issues. I guess when I take it one step beyond that and think about the organizational question, it seems to me that what we're facing in some ways at the APA is how to stay alive. Anyone ever heard the Bee Gees 70s song? It's that kind of, there's so much to do, and we have limited bandwidth. How do we be personalized in a world where the students who are graduating from our programs are used to having the emoji on their membership look like their photo, and yet how do we maintain a big picture, diverse approach so that we reach many people, but we do it in a personalized way at once? How are we agile? We need to respond quickly, but we also need to be thoughtful, and we want to avoid making big mistakes that could cause more harm than good by getting words out there. How do we stay forward thinking in terms of where the field's going, if it's artificial intelligence or integrated care, but respectful of context and history and grounded in what cultural, religious, or gender identity or other, really roots of our society mean. And so trying to meet a lot of needs in a world, at least in the United States, where member-oriented organizations are having a hard time communicating their message to young graduates. How do we kind of keep doing all this really important critical work? And there's so much of it, and we need to do it in all these ways and levels when organizations themselves are facing challenges. So I hope you all have solutions to this question.
I'm from the UK, but actually I've not got a UK hat on because I've only got one head. I think from the International Union of Psychological Science, which is a sort of overarching international organisation, I'm not meaning to be cryptic when I say this, but actually I think our biggest strength is our biggest challenge. Our modesty and our reflection can be our challenges. So if we just take open science, IAPSIS, or however you want to pronounce it, is committed to open science, and yet we do spend a lot of time talking about our own internal problems about that. Actually, psychology is leading on this. We are leading on this. So I think there's two things here. One is that we need to deal with all the local issues collectively. EFPA is probably the most sophisticated regional organisation there is. IAPSIS is working with regions now, and it's the most sophisticated region. And regionally, you can deal with those other things, but the open science thing, we need to grab it, we need to take it, we need to celebrate it, and we need to lead on it. And I think the challenge in doing that is we'll spend a lot of time talking about why we can't. So I think we need to talk about how we can do that, how we can go forward and lead on some of these things. So that's just a comment, and I'll probably come back in later. But
Okay, I will talk from the EFPA point of view when I think about these challenges, especially policy influencing, because I think that that is a big challenge for us, how to move from reacting to what is happening to having a role, a more active role in influencing these policies. And that is really important because sometimes it's too late when you're reacting, it's already decided most of the times. So we can have, we need to find ways to, at least at the European level, to start in the game in the beginning, really, and have some proactive interventions concerning different areas of importance for psychology. And I think that, first of all, being recognized as really important partners in many activities that need to the participation of psychology to solve the problems. And we need that very strongly because I think that that is not clear enough for most people. And concerning education and training, well, I think the EuropeSci project has still, it's very promising. It can be enlarged. It can continue. I think there's lots of things that we can do with EuropeSci. I hope that we are already making a big effort to have more countries and more people with EuropeSci, but we should develop it more and have more opportunities to exchange that and to exchange training aspects of the psychologists that can include many of the things that were here, also cultural diversity, human rights, everything that now happens at HEFPA that could be also included or suggested to include in the programs. And I would like about the third question about collaborating. We started something at APA some years ago about success stories, but it just didn't continue. And I would like very much, because I think that will be very informative, to have success stories of the best practices, also the success stories of any country that dealt with a problem and that really managed to advance psychology. And that could be a kind of repository of good strategies, tricks even, how to move, because sometimes if we don't exchange this, we are always trying to guess what needs to be done. And I think that this can become also a kind of leadership training for organizations, that I think it's really necessary at the different levels to create a leadership program for people that are dealing with the different levels of influence. And so, but it can start there with how did we manage to solve, for example, insurance participation in healthcare, which is, I think, a very important issue in many countries. Being reimbursed for insurance is quite different. And it's really important to grant access to many people. And I think that there are examples that are very successful, and we need to know about more how we can approach, because normally these companies are global now, or European. So there's other different levels that we can approach them to force them to be present and reimburse, for example. And that could change really some of the accessibility of our patients, for example. So the issues like that, I think that could be taken, some success stories put together, being available, train leaders, and so develop the work like that.
Yeah, I would like to pick on what was said. I mean, we have similar problems in Germany, which were mentioned, that we have different professions doing psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is not protected title in Germany, so you have two main professions, like the medical doctors, and psychological psychotherapists, but you also have a third group which has no academic training. And well, we're working on it, but it's a long-term political process. And I'd say, connecting to what Telmo said, I mean, the exchange on the European level about practices and experiences and best practices and different rules and legislation is quite important to convince people nationally and finally also perhaps on the European level. Because the European level has a two-sided sword, in my opinion. In some respect, FPA and the European discussion has been helpful for developing psychology in emerging countries in Europe. On the other hand, I see that there's a strong strategy in the European Union to deregulate. And I'd say more pointedly, for example, the bachelor-master process, the Bologna process, really was in some respect devastating in Germany, at least for psychology, because we had a perfect system, not perfect, but a really good system. And we have now many problems due to the Bologna process with respect to quality, which we didn't have before, because it's a competition to lower standards. And I do see this on the European level as well. And it's very tricky to work with it, because when you introduce new standards or minimum standards, the minimum standards suddenly get the average and you get new minimum standards. And that's a very tricky problem, and we really have to be cautious not to go down, but to go up with our standards.
An actual question. Well, I think a little bit the same. That is there not a role for the AFPA to have more influence on national politics? For instance, in Belgium, we see that psychologists, well, the national health, they say, okay, stay psychologist, you're very brave, you do your job very good, but for the rest you have no influence. For instance, a certificate of ADHD or autism spectrum disorder must be delivered by a medical doctor. It's not a psychologist who can deliver it. And it stays like that. And we have not enough influence on the decision makers to change that. My question is, in the openness of an FPA, is there not a way that we can use, in a good practice of course, use FPA to put more emphasis on influence on national politics? As yesterday I heard about political psychology, well, might and locus of control and power. That's a question for FPA, I think, and could be, as what I think, of more influence on this political decision making.
I'd like to add to that, if I may, because echoing Pam's point about leadership, I do think it's about psychology providing that leadership, and not just for psychologists, but for the wider psychological workforce. It's certainly something we're looking at in our society. We already credit the trainings of a number of other elements of the psychological workforce. We're looking at a specific membership grade for them. And in terms of a lot of the work that the UK government is doing, and the National Health Service in particular, in terms of horizon scanning 15, 20 years out, in terms of, what is the healthcare workforce going to need? What's that going to look like? They're trying to unite all of the healthcare professions across the UK, and not just psychiatry, but occupational therapy, physiotherapy, all of the different professions, to say, how can we work together to build a workforce for the future? And we see our role as actually taking part in that and shaping that debate and driving those answers, rather than trying to protect what we've got. And I think one of the issues that we face as a discipline and profession in the UK is that different elements of the profession can be scared of what's going to come in the future, very keen to protect what we've got, and then actually, rather than us shaping the future, we are shaped into a future. And I think that's a mistake. And I think it does link with political influencing. And I think it does link with actually using our science, though, to do our political influencing in a good and sophisticated way. I mean, Connie, as you know, our colleagues in Norway, because we went on a field visit with them, are very, very good at that. And I wonder if that is something that EFPA and, all of this group here can do. When a particular national organisation is particularly sophisticated in terms of how they do something and they get very good results from it, actually sharing that learning, so not just the content, but also the process of what we're doing in that particular respect. We, I think, are doing quite well in terms of parliamentary influencing, and certainly very happy to share that, but other colleagues are doing other things in different ways. So for me, it is about actually psychologists showing leadership in terms of what we do and how we do it. A colleague from Switzerland, yeah.
I just wanted to add, we had a law passed, the law of psychology in Switzerland, and what has to be thought about is that the devil sometimes lies in details. It's like the question we have now: what do we do with people who call themselves, for example, depression counselors? And who proceeds against those people? We have to do it ourselves. It's work. You have to have people outside looking what qualifications the people have. So even if you have such a law, it's not the end of the story. There's even more to come. And it's difficult to really define the things that you prevent this kind of things. We also have the struggle with medicine, of course. We're in the same field, and try to have a voice also on the political scene. We try also to raise our voice with respect to migration, to this kind of themes. And it's always difficult to say where's the limit, not to be partisan, of course, but to raise the voice of psychology. And I think this is something very important that we all have to share.
Okay, I will continue about law on psychology, I think, because it's a strive of our association in Lithuania, but I can hear that there can be a devil in details, but still I think it's very important for us as psychologists be recognized by politicians and by society. But from the other hand, I think it's also very important that we can believe ourselves, that we can make an influence for others and for politicians also, because sometimes it seems that we can believe ourselves in that. And also when we're talking about European standards, it's very important to bring it in our country, and we want to put them into legislation. But still what happens that our society splits, because part of them are against to, I don't know, to keep ethical codex, to have or be like supervised practice and so on, because you have to pay money and that's it. But still, I think we should work more with our own societies, and what we think to do is to start with our psychological students, just to know new standards and to be like usual for them already.
I think this resonates with some of the broader comments to Pam's point about leadership, and Nicola and Neringa, what you were just saying, that and the policy question is that we tend to want to maintain peace. It's almost like by being a psychologist, it's that we want to, we don't want to create waves. And you know, one thing about good leadership is that it's uncomfortable. Change is hard, uncertainty is hard for human beings, but if you build consensus, actually Telmo and I were talking about this in terms of the leadership that EFBA is taking about, you know, being part of the process. And I can say in the United States, when I was thinking about this conversation, I was reflecting on our training programs. We don't, in our graduate training programs, whether they're master's or doctoral level, there is not a core course that talks about leadership. There is not a course that teaches students about policy. If you want to learn how to go talk to the Congress, then hopefully you have some kind of lucky chance, or you might have, we really don't teach psychologists to say, I will lead, because we're therapists in a mindset, and we want to bring people in. I don't think that those are mutually exclusive, and you know, we are the science of leadership. We develop the science of how to create leaders, and so whether it's a dedicated course or you know, part of supervised training, really starting to inculcate our students from the time they were undergraduates that psychologists are leaders. It's not, in the US, it's soft science, it's not real science. You know, this is very real and actually probably the most relevant science there is of any science. And so kind of changing the voice of psychology to be one that is much stronger and says, go sit at that table, because if you're not there, that says you're gonna, you know, if you're not at the table, you'll be on the menu, right? And we really need to knock on those doors and insist on being there. I can say when I worked in the U.S. Congress, I was amazed to find how social workers, medical doctors, nurses, everyone was knocking on the door of, you know, policymakers. There's no psychologists, so they're writing laws and saying mental health, it means you must have a social worker, it means you must have a psychiatric nurse. If there's not a psychologist there, we're not in any of those scenes, but our training should really try to work on that. Certainly, I think something that we could also, you know, share and join together on. Oh, yeah.
Just to add something, I think that FPIS has been doing something about this, and I hope that in the future we will do more. Like, for example, I was recently in Ukraine, in the parliament of Ukraine, in a parliamentary session that were discussing the legislation concerning the profession. And what we could say there is that there are several examples of legislation that they could adopt, but that the standard of the Europe side was really important. And they just, it was a really important session because in the end they just wrote this statement saying that yes, we want to adopt Europe side as a standard for our training in Lithuania. And so I think that hopefully there will be more opportunities to address different issues, Belgium, whatever, in different areas based on our consensus or the work of our boards and groups, where we can just go and say something. Of course, we cannot force governments to do anything, but having strong consensus from an organization that represents 37 countries and 350,000 people, it's good, because mostly when they are writing laws or whatever, they want to refer to some examples that are important or advanced or whatever. So I think that if we manage to do our own work, and if we follow what we want now to do is more project-oriented organization, we can answer more specific questions from our members by saying that is our take on this issue, and then saying that to the government or going there, like we are starting to do also. We did that before, but we are more and more doing this, going there to engage with this. And as we know, sometimes, this happens with many countries, someone saying this from the outside is more heard than from the inside. So, but that's what it is. But we need to know how to do it. I hopefully we will do this more and more.
We had Quentin and then Connie and then
Just to pick up on the theme of leadership, it's certainly been identified by our Future of Psychology group in New Zealand that leadership's important. We've had a sort of leadership mentor scheme which has been well received. But in terms of being systematic, the way that Amanda was talking, I'm not sure that we're quite there yet, and quite interested to see the BPS and the clinical division explicitly having that as one of their competencies in terms of training. So that's certainly an area that we will be watching. But the other point, in terms of actually being leaders and asking those difficult questions. I mean, we're a small country, so it's possible to meet with the Minister of Health. It's possible to be knocking on that door, but you might know we have a new government, and there's a lot of people. So it's trying to meet. I think it was Telma discussing being able to know what their agenda is and sort of link common sort of policies and ideas that are going to help them do what they need to do. And I think I have just read a paper from Tor from Norway talking about that collaboration across unions, across government, across the sort of other authorities. And that's a real challenge to be able to communicate your difference, your different point of view, but also be at that table and have a discussion that's going to go somewhere. Thinking about being uncomfortable, I mean, I had a conversation with you earlier about EFPA talking about making a statement about colonization, and that apparently didn't come about. And it's a very a theme within New Zealand that's very strong. So I guess one of the things that we can do in this kind of forum is put out, in Māori we would say we put out a wero, a challenge. You know, you lay down the javelin or the taiaha and say, this is a wero to EFPA or to your organizations to ask, are you really addressing or redressing the colonization? So in New Zealand, we have our Māori do not fare well in our poverty statistics, our child protection, high suicide rate, all those things, and that is a consequence of ongoing colonization. So we not only need to make a statement, but then we actually need to do something about that. So there's a wero to our European colleagues.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on EFPA a little bit. Of course, it's helpful to have a collaboration and also have EFPA perhaps as a source where we can really exchange our experiences. But it's also double sword, so to say, because EFPA is not helpful in the discussion in Germany, for example, right now with psychotherapy, because European standards are lower than those we have. And so it's a kind of disadvantage somehow, just talking about the specialist degree in EFPA about psychotherapy. It's blocking our way just to see the other way around, for example. I think 2 points I'd like to make. One thing is, and that's part of a problem in EFPA, in my view too, that's in our discussion in Germany, it's quite important that we can make points in terms of science. So we can show easily that besides perhaps psychiatry, the only research that's being done on the effectiveness of psychotherapy is being done by psychologists. So that's a major point to keep out other professions. And so the integration of the scientific field, it's of course given in those societies where both parties are integrated, but half of Europe it is not. So that's one point, and the other point is just what you mentioned, Amanda. We as clinical psychologists, and that's a problem. I mean, okay, perhaps half of the psychologists are clinical or psychotherapists, but the other half is not. And just to mention what I said in the evening, it's quite interesting for me. If I want to go to the Academy of Management, I can't go to the APA, because they're having exactly the same dates every year. So every IO psychologist in the States won't go to the APA because the Academy of Management is more important. When I was visiting your, fortunately, thanks again, last year conference, I couldn't find hardly any theme in IO. And who's talking about leadership? It's IO. So I rather argue, have a broader view, also in EFPA, about the other professions, looking more closely on science, because that's the strength, not only due to open science, but we're really doing a good job in psychology, and these are major assets we should also put more forward when we talk about our societies.
That's better. I'd like to agree with all the recent speakers saying I do believe leadership is just critically important for psychologists, and it doesn't seem to come naturally to a lot of us. So we have to, train our membership and skill them up to be able to do it. Now, how and when is the big question, because advocacy and leadership is something I've always been interested in, tried to teach it at university in the professional programs, but the students at that stage not interested. All they want to do is one-to-one therapeutic work. So it's more recently within the society, by modelling what we can achieve by taking leadership positions. So for instance, we decided to set up a body which was all the health professions or all the allied health professions in Australia. And our association, the psychologists, led it for over a decade. And that opened enormous government doors, because I could go to Canberra and say, look, I'm representing 150,000 health professions. So modelling has encouraged people, and we're now looking at how to use those skills and develop a course with the leaders in the society. But I do also think there's another type of leadership, and that is leadership of people who are members to come up through the ranks and take office bearer positions and prepare themselves to be on our boards and so forth. So I'm interested in collaboration with any other societies that are interested in developing such training for their membership in either way, political leadership and advocacy, or leadership within the society.
I've just got a few comments. First of all, about collaboration. I think we've got to collaborate out as well as in. Certainly, the International Council for Scientific Unions and the International Council for Social Science Unions are joining in Paris after we've had our General Assembly in Montreal. And that's a real opportunity now, because psychology, through our union, has a place at the table and has been involved in setting that up. But we can only move forward on that if we do collaborate with the economists, the anthropologists, the geographers, they're great pals, all those other people. We can only do it if we collaborate with those. My second thing is that actually I've been really surprised, I know in the UK anyway, but around the world, how many people with a psychology background are in positions of power. I bet you in all your governments or all your government departments, you will find people who have a psychology background. We're not very smart about this. We need to get them. We need to talk to them. We need to liaise with them. We need to, rather than responding too late to things, and in the UK, once a white paper comes out or a green paper comes out, it's actually already decided. It isn't a consultation. We need to be at the table before the table's set. In fact, we need to be setting the table. You're right, we don't need to be the menu, but we need to be setting the table. So I think we're not very smart. We're not very smart about applying psychology to our own behaviour. I'm a social psychologist. Mutual interdependence is the most effective way of collaborative working. But we're not mutually interdependent, because quite often when we talk, we're actually talking about the same thing. We're not actually saying, which bit can you do? Certainly the IO people. Why do we not have the IO people doing reviews and things? Surely they're the people who know how organisations work. So we're just not very smart. So my plea really is to let's be really smart about this. Let's see what resources we've got. Let's use the people, that's probably the wrong word. Let's participate with the people, that are in positions of power and actually move forward, because the conversation we're having now is really useful, and I feel really good. Sort of a bit like the Bay of Pigs, it's really good, we're all talking. But actually, to move forward, we need to actually decide on a few things that we're going to do and then move forward. I think EPA have done that, because you are moving forward on policy. You're saying, this is the policy and we're going to take it forward. And certainly when I'm president, that's what we will be doing. We're deciding these are the things we really want to support. And then finally, I think the regions, and I'm talking internationally now, not European, are really important. When I set up the African Union of Psychology, some of those places didn't have a psychologist. When we did the ASEAN region, not the Pacific region, but the ASEAN region, somebody from Cambodia came along who was a social worker. That was the only psychology they had. So I think we've actually got to not say, you can't do that. We've got to say, if we're collaborating with them, how can we help you do it? How can we support you to do it? Because if we don't do that, we'll be gatekeeping. And gatekeeping doesn't move forward, because we've got to open the gate, really, and lead out of the gate and have people following us rather than just keeping the gate closed. So I know it sounds unusual for somebody to say that, but I think we do need to let other people in. We do need to talk to those people. I don't think we could ever talk to the psychoanalyst. We're just not going to do that, the psychotherapist. But there are other people that are doing really good work. And they are supporting Cambodia. These guys were the only people supporting. And they were in their own way doing psychology, and they have psychology courses now. So I think we need to be a bit more open about how we do things. And we do need to use our context. We really do need to do that.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Francisco, I think we're getting close to
Okay.
time.
Well, first of all, we are very interested in collaboration with ones that want to make some training in advocating or leadership. I think it's a very important topic. About the thing of gatekeeping or not, well, I have to link that to something said before. We need people in power positions. We have people in power positions, but there are a few compared with other professions with whom we compete. So in Portugal, now we have some psychologists that are members of the parliament, and 1 or 2 or 3 that are in top positions in the public administration. Very good. We are connected with them strategically, with very goal-oriented with them, and that's very important. But that's not sufficient because of the number. We need more. It's not sufficient when compared with medical doctors that are in politics, for instance, or nurses. Even with nurses, so it's not sufficient. We need more. We need to use our tools, or tools that it was supposed that we were experts using. We now are training psychologists with the basic training to cost-effective interventions, how to evaluate and put things in terms of cost-effective. And we have a training, some training sessions, basic ones, to be easy to everyone know something about it. So things like that could be important too. To make more of this idea of have some political strength, but we have to have more people on power positions, and we have to have probably a goal-oriented strategy to do that. And about the gatekeeping, yeah, I think we have to balance that because. If we were the ones who have a open attitude, we are going to be killed. So it's not possible to have an open attitude if the others do not have it at all. So we have to balance that. Yeah, we like very much to train other people. Yeah, we like very much to work in multidisciplinary teams. Of course, we already do that. Really, we already do that. But be careful with what do the others give to us or are going to give to us when we are doing this. So be careful with that too, strategically.
Thank you very much, everybody. We're coming to an end, and I'm going to take this opportunity to try and summarise all of that in 30 seconds. Well, thank you for sharing, first of all. I think it's been it's been very helpful for me as an outsider. And I've heard lots of concerns, hopes, aspirations, willingness to change, but also a sense of frustration. So I'm kind of with Lynn in this, in that we need to do something now. So I think one of the things I'll do is I'll type some of this up and maybe send out some doodle polls for some work. Because as you were talking, I was just writing down things, and I'm going to try and summarise them up. So, lots of debate about open science. I think there is an issue around open science for organisations, in the sense of lots of organisations rely on sales of journals for their membership income. So there is a tension there between making it open and actually surviving as an organisation. But the future is open science, so there's a big discussion that needs to take place about open science. There's lots of talk about, and I've heard this last week as well at EFPA, around kind of the regulatory environment and the legislative framework. And I think EFPA's doing some work on that. I think it's a good initiative to try and map that landscape, certainly across Europe, and I think it'll be a valuable tool. It might be worthwhile looking further abroad than Europe, but initially I think it'd be really helpful. And I think there is a challenge for capacity building. So I've been told not to use that phrase, for strengthening our sister organisations around the world. I think there's some sharing that we could do around that. And potentially this is one of the work streams I'm thinking about. Is it time to review training if it's not fit for purpose, or if we're feeling that we're being perceived? That's maybe a discussion that needs to happen as well amongst this group. And for me, importantly as well, what's going to happen in the future? So we've got this debate around artificial intelligence, cyber, the way children, for instance, interact at the moment. You know, my son's always on the screen. So I think there are some big issues that we probably need to pick out. I was just listening to your last comment there about we need more psychologists as politicians. That's never going to happen. But, I mean, there'll be lawyers. But what we need to do is to build a public case, because it's the public who elect politicians. And actually, I don't think we're good at that as an industry. I mean, I've worked in two industries which are anathema, legal profession and the gas industry, and they were better at communicating with the public. So I think we need to do something about maybe developing a campaign around communicating with the public. The question is, how do we do this? And I'm wondering whether we need to have a strategy day, or whether we need to arrange some exchange trips informally at the beginning. And I'd written down training in advocacy, training in partnership, training in impact, and maybe identifying a few work streams out of it. I mean, I can distill this and share it with everybody and take this forward. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Nicola.
No, it's perfectly summarised.
Okay, thank you very much.